The words hung in the air between them, sharp as broken glass. "You have to leave." Julian's voice was a raw, hollowed-out thing, stripped of its usual command. It was the voice of a man watching his world fracture. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, the glittering expanse of soul a cold, indifferent witness below. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. Ilara stood her ground, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Every survival instinct she had honed on the streets screamed at her to run, to take this chance he was giving her and disappear. But her feet felt bolted to the polished marble floor. "Julian, look at me!" He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening in his shoulders. The immaculate tailoring of his suit seemed like armor, but she could see the cracks. She knew where to find them now. She was the one who had put them there. "I can't," he whispered. The sound was swallowed by the cavernous silence of the room. "If you stay, if my father finds out how much you mean—" He trailed off, the unfinished thought a more terrifying threat than any overt warning. She took a step closer, the scent of rain and his expensive cologne filling her senses, a combination that had come to mean safety. How ironic. "So this is it? You tell me everything, you show me the man behind the monster, and then you throw me away?" Her voice trembled, laced with a bitterness that tasted like ash. Finally, he turned. The devastation in his eyes was a physical blow, a punch to her chest that stole her breath. The controlled mask was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate vulnerability she had only ever glimpsed in their most private moments. A faint, silvery scar cut through his left eyebrow, a permanent reminder of the violence that shaped him, the world he was now trying to shield her from. "Throwing you away is the only thing keeping you alive," he said, each word a testament to his agony. He took a single, predatory step toward her, then another, until he was close enough to touch. He didn't. He just looked down at her, his gaze mapping her face, as if committing it to memory for a long, cold eternity. "He will see you as a weakness, and he will destroy you to get to me." Tears she had refused to shed now burned at the back of her eyes. "And what about you? What happens to you when I'm gone?" A ghost of a smile, so bleak it was more of a grimace, touched his lips. "I go back to being what I was before I met you." Empty. He didn't have to say the word. She heard it anyway. "I don't accept that," she said, her own voice dropping to a whisper. "You have to," he rasped, his control finally snapping. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her cheek, his fingers trembling. "Ilara, please, for me, go, be safe. Live the life you were meant to live, the one you fought so hard for. Forget you ever met me." But she knew, and he knew, that was an impossible request. Forgetting him would be like trying to forget how to breathe. Weeks earlier, the world had been a much simpler, if crueler, place for Ilara Vance. Her world was measured in the thinness of her socks and the remaining hours until the public library closed. It was a world of concrete benches that were too cold to sleep on and the gnawing ache of a stomach that was never quite full. She was not a victim. She was a survivor, caught in the undertow of a life that had pulled her down after her scholarship had evaporated and her part-time job had followed suit. New York had chewed her up and spit her out, and she had landed in Seoul on a misguided whim, following a half-baked teaching opportunity that proved to be a scam. Now she was stranded, her pride the only thing she had left in abundance. Her days were a routine of quiet desperation. She spent her mornings in a small, warm cafe, nursing a single coffee for hours, while using their free Wi-Fi to apply for jobs that never responded. Her afternoons were for walking, for trying to blend in, to not look like what she was, homeless, invisible. Her nights were the worst, a patchwork of insecure shelters and, when those were full, hidden corners of the city that offered a sliver of solitude. She was sitting on a bench in a small manicured park nestled between towering skyscrapers, sketching in a worn notebook. It was her one luxury, a pencil and paper. She drew the faces of strangers, the architecture of the city, the intricate patterns of leaves. It was how she made sense of the world, how she reminded herself that there was still beauty in it, even if she felt so far removed from it. She was focused on the sharp, elegant lines of a new building across the street, her pencil flying across the page, when she felt it. A gaze. It was a physical sensation, like the sun breaking through the clouds to land on her skin. Heavy, intense, unwavering. She tried to ignore it, to attribute it to the usual passing curiosity, but it persisted. Slowly, cautiously, she lifted her head, her eyes scanning the sparse crowd. And then she saw him. He was standing near a black sedan so sleek and polished, it seemed to absorb the light around it. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that was so perfectly tailored, it looked less like clothing and more like a second skin. His hair was black, styled with a casual precision that spoke of immense effort and expense. But it was his face that held her. It was a face of sharp angles and stark beauty, a face that belonged on a magazine cover or a movie screen. Yet there was a profound loneliness in his eyes, a deep, abiding stillness that seemed at odds with the bustling city around him. And he was staring directly at her. Julian Kang did not notice people. People noticed him. They were obstacles in a hallway, faces in a boardroom, threats to be neutralized. They were a sea of insignificance through which he moved, insulated by his wealth and the fearsome reputation of his family's name. His life was a gilded cage, constructed by his father, the formidable Chairman Kang of the Sunhua Syndicate. It was a life of duty, of violence simmering just beneath a veneer of corporate legitimacy, of crushing, soul-deep isolation. He was on his way to a meeting, one he was already dreading, when his driver, Min-jun, slowed the car for a pedestrian. Julian's gaze drifted idly out the window, expecting nothing. And then he saw her. The world didn't so much stop as it did sharpen into a single, perfect point of focus. Her. She was sitting on a park bench, her body curved over a notebook. Her clothes were simple, worn. Her hair was a glorious storm of coils that the sunlight caught and turned to bronze. She was entirely absorbed in what she was doing, a small furrow of concentration between her brows. She was the most real thing he had ever seen. In a world of artifice and performance, she was raw, authentic truth. He felt it then, a jolt so profound it was almost painful. It was not just attraction, it was recognition, a sense of finding something he hadn't even known he was searching for. The loneliness that was his constant companion receded, replaced by an overwhelming, inexplicable need. I need to know who she is. The thought was not a whim. It was an imperative, as absolute and undeniable as a command from his father. Min-jun, he said, his voice quiet. Sir? His lieutenant and only friend glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his expression neutral. Julian didn't take his eyes off her. Stop the car. Min-jun pulled the sedan smoothly to the curb without question. Julian watched as she finally looked up, her gaze meeting his across the street. Her eyes were wide, intelligent, and wary. A jolt, electric and sharp, passed between them. She held his gaze for a second longer than was comfortable, a flicker of defiance in her expression, before she deliberately looked away, dismissing him. No one dismissed Julian Kang. A slow, unfamiliar smile touched his lips. It felt foreign on his face. He watched her for another minute, imprinting the image of her onto his memory. The way she chewed on her lower lip in concentration, the graceful line of her neck, the sheer, unadorned presence of her. Find out everything about her, he said, his voice soft but steel-edged. Min-jun's eyes followed his gaze to the woman on the bench. He nodded once. It will be done, sir. Julian finally leaned back against the supple leather, the ghost of her image already burned behind his eyelids. The boring meeting, the weight of his obligations, the cold dread of his existence. It all faded into the background. For the first time in a very long time, the world felt full of possibility. The world felt like her. Alara tried to shake off the encounter. It was just a rich man in a fancy car, probably bored, staring at a woman who clearly didn't belong in his world. It meant nothing. But she couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on her. It had felt less like an appraisal and more like an inventory, as if he were cataloging every part of her. It was unsettling, creepy even. She packed up her sketchbook and started walking, melting back into the anonymity of the city. She needed to find a place to charge her phone and figure out where she was going to sleep that night. The encounter was a distraction she couldn't afford. 2 days later, she was in the same cafe, meticulously nursing another coffee, when a man in a crisp suit approached her table. He wasn't the man from the park, but he had the same air of quiet authority. He was shorter, his face impassive. "Miss Alara Vance?" he asked. Ice flooded Alara's veins. How did he know her name? She didn't respond, her eyes narrowing. Her hand instinctively tightened around her coffee cup, the ceramic warm against her suddenly cold skin. The man seemed to understand her alarm. He placed a pristine white envelope on the table. "My employer, Mr. Kang, requests the honor of your company for dinner this evening. He has made a reservation at La Yun at 8 o'clock. Alara stared at the envelope, then back at the man. "Mr. Kang?" "The man from the park," the man clarified, his expression unchanging. "A car will be waiting for you outside this cafe at 7:30. Please." He gave a short, formal bow and walked away before she could form a coherent protest. Her mind was racing. This was insane. How had he found her? How did he know her name? This went beyond creepy and into terrifying territory. She looked around the cafe, suddenly feeling exposed, watched. She should run. She should grab her backpack and never come back to this part of the city again. But curiosity, that treacherous and persistent cat, was gnawing at her. And something else, too. A flicker of wounded pride. Did he think he could just summon her like this? Send his henchman with an order? Who the hell did he think he was? She tore open the envelope. Inside was not a letter, but a single, thick credit card and a folded piece of paper. On the paper was a handwritten note in sharp, elegant script. "A small advance for your time. Please buy yourself something appropriate for the evening. I look forward to seeing you. J.K." Beneath the note was a staggering number, a balance. The amount on the credit card was more money than she had seen in her entire life. Enough to get a flight home. Enough to rent an apartment for a year. Enough to change everything. It was a trap. It had to be. A test. Or worse. But it was also a lifeline. Her gaze fell to her reflection in the dark screen of her phone, her worn sweater, her tired face. For weeks, she had been invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a prosperous city. And now, this powerful, mysterious man not only saw her, he was demanding her presence. He was offering her a glimpse into a world she could only dream of, even if it was just for one night. Against all better judgment, a reckless, defiant plan began to form in her mind. Fine. He wanted her company? He could have it. She would take his money, she would buy a dress, and she would go to his dinner. But she wouldn't be some grateful, simpering charity case. She would be herself, and she would find out exactly what he wanted. At 7:30 on the dot, Alara walked out of the cafe. She was a completely different woman. She had spent the afternoon in a state of dizzying, terrified excitement. She had walked into a high-end department store, the credit card feeling like a hot coal in her hand, expecting to be thrown out at any moment. But the card worked. She had chosen a dress of deep emerald green silk. It was simple, elegant, and clung to her curves in a way that made her feel powerful. She had her hair professionally styled, the tight coils shaped into a sophisticated updo that framed her face. She wore new shoes that made her stand taller, and for the first time in months, she wore makeup. Not enough to hide, but just enough to highlight. She felt like Cinderella, and she was acutely aware that the clock was ticking. The same black sedan was waiting. The man, Min-jun, got out and opened the back door for her without a word. She slid onto the leather seat, the interior smelling of wealth and something else she couldn't quite name. Power, perhaps. The ride was silent. Ilara stared out at the city lights, her heart hammering. What was she doing? This was a terrible idea. He was a stranger, a man who had stalked her, a man with limitless resources. This could end badly in 100 different ways. I can handle myself, she thought, the mantra a thin shield against her mounting fear. One dinner, find out what he wants, and then I'm gone. The car pulled up to the Sheila, one of Seoul's most luxurious hotels. Min-jun led her through the opulent lobby to a private elevator. They ascended in silence, the soft chime of the elevator marking their climb into another world. Layan was on the top floor, a 3-Michelin-star restaurant with panoramic views of the entire city. Julian was already there, standing by the window, looking out at the view. He turned as she entered, and for the second time, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. If she thought he was handsome in the park, he was devastating now. He wore a dark navy suit, no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. The casual touch only made him look more intimidating, more in command. His eyes swept over her, a slow, appreciative journey from her hair down to her shoes and back up again. A flicker of something hot and possessive lit his gaze before he masked it. "You came," he said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone, even more compelling than she had imagined. "You made it difficult to refuse," Ilara retorted, her voice steadier than she felt. She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. "Is it legal? Having people followed? Finding out their private information?" A corner of his mouth lifted in that same infuriatingly attractive half-smile. "Probably not. Are you going to report me?" "I'm considering it," she said, tilting her chin up. "First, I want to know what this is. What do you want from me?" He gestured to the table, exquisitely set for two. "I want to have dinner with you, Ilara Vance." Hearing him say her full name sent another shiver down her spine. But this time it was less fear and more something else. Something dangerously like a thrill. She sat down, placing her small, borrowed clutch on the table. "People like you don't just have dinner with people like me," she stated, her gaze unflinching. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Kang." The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by an intensity that was almost frightening. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto hers. "I know that. And my name is Julian. I know you're a painter, or an artist. I saw your drawings. I know you were an art history major at NYU until you lost your funding. I know you've been in Seoul for 2 months, and I know you're in trouble." Every word was a nail hammering her to her chair. He knew everything. The sheer violation of it was staggering. The anger she felt was sharp and clean, a welcome antidote to her fear. "That's creepy," she said, her voice dropping to a low, furious hiss. "That is stalker-level, grade A creepy. You have no right." "I agree," he said, not a hint of apology in his tone. "It was a means to an end." "An end? What end?" she demanded. "This," he said simply, gesturing to the table between them. "This moment, having you sit across from me. I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who want something from me. My money, my influence, my name. They are predictable. They are boring. When I saw you in the park, you were none of those things. You were the first thing that has interested me in a very long time." His honesty was disarming, a strategic weapon she hadn't anticipated. She didn't know how to respond to it. Her anger was her armor, but his frankness was slipping through the cracks. "So, I'm a curiosity?" she asked, sarcasm her last line of defense. "A new toy for the rich boy who has everything?" "No," he said, his voice softening. "You're a lifeline." The words hung in the air, so unexpected, so raw, that they silenced her completely. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw past the power and the wealth. She saw the profound loneliness she had glimpsed in the park, a vast, empty space behind his eyes. It was a loneliness she recognized, a cousin to her own. The waiter arrived, a silent, graceful presence who served them a series of dishes that were more art than food. They ate in a tense silence for a few minutes before Alara spoke again, her tone softer now. "Why did you say that? A lifeline?" Julian put down his chopsticks. He seemed to be weighing his words, a rare sign of uncertainty. "My life is structured. It was chosen for me long before I was born. There are rules, expectations, duties. There is no room for spontaneity, no room for joy." He said the word joy as if it were a foreign concept he had only read about in books. "Seeing you, so focused, so free in your own world, it felt like breathing fresh air after being locked in a sterile room for 30 years. His self-deprecating honesty was a wrecking ball to her defenses. She found herself, against her will, feeling a sliver of empathy for this impossibly privileged, powerful man. It was absurd. He was sitting in a restaurant where one meal cost more than she had earned in the last year, lamenting his joyless life. "So, this is your idea of spontaneity?" she asked, a hint of her earlier bite returning. "Send your man to track down a homeless woman and summon her to dinner?" He had the grace to look slightly chagrined. "My methods are direct. It's the only way I know. I apologize if I frightened you." "You terrified me," she corrected him bluntly. "I am sorry for that," he said, and she believed him. "But I am not sorry I did it." They talked for hours, or rather, he asked questions and she, to her own surprise, answered. He wanted to know about her art, about New York, about what she dreamed of painting. He was an incredible listener, his attention absolute and unwavering. It was intoxicating. No one had ever listened to her like that. She was careful not to reveal too much about her current predicament, the sheer desperation of it. She let him believe she was just a struggling artist, not a woman who didn't know where she would sleep that night. It was a matter of pride. In return, he told her little about himself, speaking only in vague terms about family obligations and business pressures. He was a fortress, and he was only letting her into the manicured courtyard. The keep was still locked and heavily guarded. As the evening drew to a close, a comfortable, if still wary, rapport had settled between them. The city glittered below, a carpet of diamonds laid at their feet. "There is something else," Julian said, his tone shifting, becoming more serious. "A reason I was so determined to meet you tonight." Ilara tensed. Here it comes, the proposition, the real reason. "Tomorrow is the anniversary of my mother's death," he said, his eyes on the city below. "Every year, my father holds a formal dinner. It is a difficult occasion. He requires me to be there." He paused, then turned his gaze back to her. It was heavy with a strange, almost desperate plea. "I want you to come with me." Ilara stared at him, bewildered. "To your family dinner? For your mother's memorial? Why?" "Because I don't want to be alone," he said, the admission stark and simple. "Because the thought of sitting through it with those people in that house? I can't. Not this year. If you were there, it might be bearable." This was not what she had expected. She had braced herself for a sordid proposal, an indecent offer. Not this. not this raw, vulnerable request. "You want to rent a date for your mother's memorial?" she asked, the words coming out harsher than she intended. He flinched. "No, I want you. Your presence. You are quiet when you want to be. You are observant. You are not one of them. You are real." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. It was thick with cash. "This is for your time. 100,000 won. For your day." It wasn't $100. It was closer to 1,000. The title she had imagined for him, "The Man Who Tried to Buy My Sympathy," flashed in her mind. It was transactional. It was clumsy. It was the only way he knew how to ask for help. He was trying to buy a moment of comfort, a human shield. The absurdity of the situation almost made her laugh. A Korean mafia boss's son begging a homeless black woman to be his emotional support for a day, couching it in the only language he understood, money. "Please," he said, and the word was stripped of all arrogance. It was a pure, simple plea. "Be there with me, for my mother, just for today." She looked at the money, then at his face, at the deep, aching loneliness in his eyes. He wasn't asking her to be his mother. He was asking her to stand with him at an event in his mother's honor, to be a buffer against the coldness of his world. Her survival instincts were at war with a burgeoning, traitorous empathy. The money could solve so many of her problems, but it was the look in his eyes that made her decision. "Keep your money," she said, pushing the envelope back toward him. "I'll go." Julian looked surprised. Then a slow wave of relief washed over his features, softening the hard lines of his face. "Thank you," he breathed. "Don't thank me yet," she warned. "I have a feeling I'm going to regret this." The Kang estate was not a house. It was a fortress. It sat on a sprawling, manicured property on the outskirts of Seoul, surrounded by high walls and discreet security. It was a place of old money and dark secrets, every polished surface reflecting a cold, austere perfection. Ilara felt Julian tense beside her in the car as they passed through the heavy iron gates. The easy rapport of the previous night had evaporated, replaced by a grim silence. He had sent a new dress to her, a simple, elegant black sheath, conservative, respectful. He had also, without her asking, booked her a room at the hotel where they'd had dinner, for her convenience. She knew what it was, an act of charity he was trying to disguise as a practicality. She had slept in a real bed for the first time in months, a luxury so profound it had almost brought her to tears. Now, walking into his family home on his arm, she felt like an imposter. The air inside was cool and smelled of lilies and lemon oil. A severe-looking man, older and even more imposing than Julian, stood in the grand foyer. His eyes, as sharp and dark as Julian's, swept over Ilara with cold dismissal before landing on his son. "You are late," Chairman Kang said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Father," Julian greeted him, his tone equally cold. "This is Ilara Vance. She is my guest." The chairman's gaze flickered back to her. It was like being examined under a microscope. "A guest?" he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. He looked at her dark skin, her foreign features, and made a judgment in an instant. "An unusual choice." "I have unusual tastes," Julian replied smoothly, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on Ilara's arm. It was a gesture of possession, of protection. The dinner was an ordeal. It was attended by a handful of somber-faced family members and business associates, all of whom treated Ilara with a mixture of veiled curiosity and icy disdain. They spoke in rapid Korean, pointedly excluding her. Julian, however, stayed by her side, quietly translating when necessary, a solid, warm presence in the chilling atmosphere. He ignored the pointed remarks from his father, his focus entirely on her. She watched him interact with his family, the dutiful son mask firmly in place. But she could see the strain. She saw how he held himself, rigid and controlled, how his eyes were empty when he spoke to his father. This was his life. This cold, loveless prison. The empathy she had felt the night before deepened into something more potent, more dangerous. After dinner, Julian led her into a quiet, book-lined study. A large, beautiful portrait of a woman hung over the fireplace. She had Julian's eyes, but hers were filled with a warmth his lacked. "My mother," he said softly. "She loved this room. She used to read to me in here." "She's beautiful," Ilara said, her voice gentle. "She was," he agreed. "She was kind. The only kindness in this house died with her." He looked at Ilara then, his gaze intense. "Until you walked in." Her heart stuttered. The air in the room grew thick, charged with unspoken words. He took a step closer, and the cavernous study suddenly felt small, intimate. "I shouldn't have brought you here," he said, his voice a low murmur. "It was selfish." "I'm glad you did," she heard herself say. "Now I understand." "Do you?" he asked, a bitter smile on his lips. "I doubt it. You're seeing the cage, Ilara. You haven't seen the monster that lives inside it." Before she could ask what he meant, he closed the remaining distance between them. He raised a hand, his knuckles gently brushing her cheek. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent. It sent a shockwave through her system. All her defenses, all her warnings to herself, crumbled into dust. "I want you," he whispered, the words a raw confession. "I have no right to. It's dangerous for you, but I do." And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of starvation. It was the kiss of a man who had been drowning and had just found air. It was freighted with all his loneliness, all his frustration, all his suffocating duty. Ilara, to her own shock, kissed him back with equal fervor. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, meeting his desperation with her own. In his arms, she wasn't homeless, she wasn't invisible. She was wanted, she was seen. The weeks that followed were a surreal dream. Julian installed her in the hotel suite permanently. He filled it with art supplies, canvases, and books. He hired a private tutor to help her with her Korean. He didn't give her money directly anymore. He simply provided. It was his way. He was a king, and she was in his kingdom now. Ilara wrestled with her conscience. She was living off a man whose wealth was almost certainly built on something sinister. She was compromising the fierce independence that had been her defining trait. But she was falling for him. It was a helpless, terrifying, exhilarating freefall. He showed her a side of himself no one else saw. He was surprisingly gentle, fiercely protective. They spent their nights in her suite or his penthouse, worlds away from his father and his obligations. He would watch her sketch for hours, a quiet contentment on his face. She would make him laugh, a real, unguarded sound that seemed to surprise him every time it escaped. She saw the scars on his torso, silent maps of a violent life he refused to explain. She saw the way Min-jun would appear with a whispered, urgent message that would make Julian's face harden into a cold mask. She knew she was living on the edge of a dangerous world, but in his arms, she felt safe. "Tell me about them," she said one night, tracing the oldest scar, a pale, jagged line near his heart. Julian's body tensed beneath her touch. "They are reminders." "Of what?" She pushed gently. "That my life is not my own," he said, his voice flat. He rolled over, pulling her on top of him, his eyes dark and serious. "Don't ask about my work, Ilara. Don't ask about my family. The less you know, the safer you are." "I'm not afraid," she said, though it was only half true. "You should be," he whispered, his thumb stroking her cheek. "You should be terrified. Of me." But she wasn't. Her fear was eclipsed by the fierce, possessive love she saw in his eyes. a love that felt as vital and necessary as breathing. She was learning to trust him, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. The dream shattered on a Tuesday. Julian was supposed to meet her for dinner, but he never showed. Minjun arrived instead, his face grim. "There was an incident," he said, his voice clipped. "Mr. Kang is fine, but he will be unavailable for a few days." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Alara's bubble of happiness. An incident? What kind of incident? Minjun's jaw was tight. Business. It was the first time the violence of his world had breached her sanctuary so directly. For 3 days, she was alone in the suite, her frantic calls to Julian's phone going straight to voicemail. The silence was a suffocating blanket. The beautiful hotel room became a cage, no different from his. When he finally appeared at her door late on the 3rd night, he looked like a ghost. He was pale, exhausted, and there was a fresh cut on his cheekbone. He didn't say a word. He just walked in and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, as if he were trying to physically absorb her strength, her warmth, her reality. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I'm so sorry." She pulled back to look at him, her hand gently touching the cut on his face. "Julian, what happened? You have to tell me. I can't do this. I can't live in the dark waiting for a business incident to take you away from me." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a terrible conflict. She could see the war inside him, the instinct to protect her with ignorance versus the need to be honest with the woman he loved. "You're right," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You deserve the truth." He led her to the sofa and sat down, his shoulders slumped. He looked older, burdened by a weight she couldn't comprehend. "My family's business, the Sanhua Group. It's not just shipping and construction," he began, his voice low and steady. "That's the face of it, the legitimate front. Underneath, it's a criminal organization, what you would call the Mafia." Ilada felt the blood drain from her face. She had suspected. She had known somewhere deep down. But hearing him say the words so plainly made it real. The scars, the incidents, his father's chilling demeanor. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "My father is the head," Julian continued, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance. "I am his heir. I was raised in this world. It's all I've ever known. The incident, it was a rival faction challenging our territory. People were hurt. People died." The room was spinning. The beautiful clothes, the gourmet food, the luxurious suite. It was all paid for with blood. Her hands started to tremble. Have you... She couldn't finish the question. He finally looked at her, and the agony in his eyes was absolute. "I have done things I am not proud of, Ilara. Things I was ordered to do. I have a darkness in me that you can't even imagine." She recoiled as if he had struck her. The man she had fallen in love with, the gentle, lonely man who watched her draw and laughed at her jokes, was also this, a monster. The monster he had warned her about. "I wanted to keep you separate from it," he said, his voice pleading. "I wanted to have one part of my life that was clean, one part that was just you. But it's impossible. It's all connected. This world, it taints everything it touches." She stood up, backing away from him. Her mind was a maelstrom of love, fear, and revulsion. "So what I am to you? The good girl you keep on the side to make you feel better about the blood on your hands?" The accusation was ugly, born of her own terror and disillusionment. The words hit him like a physical blow. He flinched, his face paling further. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No, you are the reason I want to be better, the reason I hate what I am." But his words were lost in the roar of her fear. She saw the path ahead of her, a life of looking over her shoulder, of waiting for the next incident, of being complicit in his violence through her love for him. She couldn't do it. Her principles, the very core of who she was, screamed in protest. "I can't," she choked out, tears finally streaming down her face. "I can't be with you, not like this." And that was when he had said it, his voice hollowed out. "You have to leave." So she found herself back in his penthouse, in the scene that had started it all. He was giving her an out, pushing her away for her own safety, but it felt like a punishment, a life sentence of living without him. "Forget you ever met me," he begged, his hand trembling in the air between them. She looked at his face, at the man she loved, the man who was both her savior and her damnation. She knew what she had to do. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. "Okay," she whispered, the word a tiny, broken thing. She turned and walked out of the penthouse, out of his life. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen him collapse to his knees, his body racked with silent, tearing sobs. A king alone in his empty, glittering kingdom. Leaving Julian was like tearing out a part of her own soul. Ilara took the emergency cash she had stashed away from the very beginning, a secret act of self-preservation, and bought a ticket. Not back to New York, she couldn't face that failure. She went to Paris, a city of art and anonymity. She found a tiny 6th-floor walk-up apartment with a view of a slate rooftop. It was nothing like the opulence she had grown accustomed to, and she was grateful for it. The simplicity was cleansing. She got a job waitressing in a small bistro, the work mindless and tiring. It was what she needed. But the misery was a constant leaden weight in her chest. Every handsome man in a suit made her heart clench. Every flash of a sleek black car made her look twice. At night, she would lie awake in her small bed, the phantom sensation of his arms around her so real it was a physical ache. She tried to paint. He had filled her life with art, and now it was her only solace. But her canvases were filled with his face, his intense eyes, the scar through his brow, that bleak, beautiful smile. Her art was a monument to her heartbreak. Her friend Maya, the only person she had confided in via long, tearful video calls, was her anchor. "You did the right thing, Ilara," Maya would say, her voice full of sympathy. "You couldn't live that life. You chose yourself. That's strength." But it didn't feel like strength. It felt like amputation. She was safe, yes, she was free, but she was utterly, devastatingly alone. She missed his laugh. She missed his quiet presence as she sketched. She even missed his infuriating, possessive arrogance. She missed the monster because she had seen the man. "I was happy." The thought was a betrayal. In the midst of that danger and moral compromise, she had been truly, deeply happy. And now? Now she was just surviving again. It was a cold comfort. Meanwhile, half a world away, Julian Kang was living in hell. The penthouse that had once been his sanctuary now felt like a mausoleum. Her scent lingered in the sheets. Her ghost sat in the chair by the window. He saw her everywhere. Without her, the color leached from his world, leaving only the grim, gray reality of his life. The violence, the backroom deals, the cold calculations. They were no longer just duties to be performed. They were a torment, a constant reminder of what had driven her away. His father noticed the change. Julian became colder, more ruthless in his business dealings, but his eyes were dead. The fire Ilara had ignited was gone, replaced by Arctic frost. "This woman," Chairman Kang said one evening, cornering Julian in the study. "This foreigner, she has made you weak." Julian turned from the portrait of his mother, his face a mask of cold fury. "She was the only thing that ever made me feel strong." "Love is a liability," his father sneered. "I thought I taught you that. She was a distraction, It is good she is gone." Something inside Julian, something that had been dormant for years, finally snapped. It was a rebellion born of absolute despair. "No," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It is not good. And I am done." The chairman raised an eyebrow. "Done with what? Your tantrum?" "Done with this," Julian said, his arms sweeping to encompass the room, the house, the entire empire of fear his father had built. "Done with the filth, the violence, the blood. You built this life for me, but it is not my life. It is your prison, and I will not die in it." For the first time, Chairman Kong looked taken aback. He saw not a petulant son, but a man on the edge, a man with nothing left to lose. "And what will you do?" the chairman asked, his voice laced with contempt. "Run away with your little artist? Live on love?" "I will change things," Julian stated, a new, hard resolve in his voice. "I will cut out the rot. I will legitimize every part of this company, no matter the cost. I will drag Sunhua into the light, even if it burns down everything you built." "You will destroy us," his father hissed. "No," Julian corrected him. "I will redeem us." He walked toward the door, pausing to look back at his father. "I am doing this for me, and I am doing this for her. And when it is done, I will find her. And I will be a man she does not have to be ashamed to love." It was a declaration of war. Over the next 6 months, Julian waged it with the same brutal efficiency he had once applied to his father's dirty work. He, with Minjun as his loyal executor, began the painful, dangerous process of untangling the legitimate businesses from the criminal underworld. He cut off rivals not with violence, but with ruthless financial strategy. He exposed corruption, forcing out old guard loyalists to his father. He sold off the illicit enterprises, taking massive financial losses that he absorbed by leveraging the legitimate assets. He bled money, but he was cleansing the company's soul. He faced threats, betrayals, and the constant, simmering rage of his father, who was now little more than a figurehead, his power systematically dismantled by his own son. Julian worked relentlessly, fueled by a single, desperate hope: Ilara. He didn't know where she was. He had deliberately not asked Minjun to find her. It was his penance. He had to become worthy first. He had to build a world he could ask her to share, not a cage he would trap her in. 1 year after she had walked away, it was done. The Sunhua Group was smaller, less profitable, but it was clean. It was a legitimate global logistics and construction firm. The transformation was brutal and bloody in its own corporate way, but the violence was over. That evening, Julian stood in his penthouse, looking out at the city. He was exhausted, but for the first time, he felt a sliver of peace, a sliver of hope. "Minjun," he said into his phone. "Sir, find her." It took Minjun less than a day. Ilara was sketching by the Seine, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow on the water. A year had passed, a year of healing, a year of aching. She had her own small exhibition in a local gallery coming up. She had built a life. It was a quiet life, a lonely life, but it was hers. She felt it again, that same intense gaze. Her head snapped up, her heart stopped. He was standing on the opposite side of the promenade, leaning against the stone embankment. He was thinner, the lines on his face deeper, but it was him. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple gray sweater and dark trousers. He looked human, real. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't move. It was like that first day in the park, a moment frozen in time. Slowly, he started walking toward her. He didn't rush. His eyes never left hers. With every step he took, the year of separation, the pain, the loneliness, it all melted away. leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of their connection. He stopped in front of her. He looked tired and hopeful and terrified all at once. "Ilara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Julian," she breathed, the name a prayer on her lips. "It's done," he said simply. "It's clean. The business, my life, it's all legitimate now. There is no more blood, no more darkness." He took a shaky breath, his vulnerability laid bare for her to see. "I built a world for you, Ilara, a world you could live in, a world I could be worthy of you in. If you'll still have me." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock and relief, and a love so overwhelming it threatened to break her. He had changed his world for her. He had faced down his own demons, his own father, his own past, all for her. She didn't need to say a word. She launched herself into his arms, her hands tangling in his hair, her mouth finding his. The reunion kiss was not like the first one. That had been desperation. This was a homecoming. It was a promise. It was the end of their separation and the beginning of everything. It was tender and deep and full of the silent, shared language of their year-long heartache. It tasted of forgiveness and second chances. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, his hands cupping her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he whispered, the words he had never been able to say before. "I love you, Ilara Vance." "I love you too," she cried, laughing through her tears. "I never stopped." He smiled, a real, brilliant smile that reached his eyes and lit him from within. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He was no longer the kingpin. He was just Julian, her Julian. And she was finally home. 2 years later, the Seoul skyline glittered outside the window of a different kind of penthouse. This one was not a sterile cage of marble and glass, but a home, filled with light, color, and the happy clutter of a shared life. Canvases, some finished, some in progress, leaned against the walls. The air smelled of oil paint and fresh coffee. Ilara stood at her easel, a smudge of viridian green on her cheek, adding the final touches to a portrait. It was a portrait of Julian, not as the world saw him, but as she did. He was laughing, the scar above his eye barely visible, his eyes full of the light she had put there. Her work was celebrated now, the resilient heart, the critics called her, an artist whose work pulsed with emotional truth. Julian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He was dressed casually, his sleeves rolled up. He was still the CEO of the Sunhua Group, but he was a different man. He led with integrity and vision, not fear. He had faced his past and built a new future, a legacy of redemption. "Is that supposed to be me?" he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "He looks too happy." She leaned back against him, her heart full. "He is," she said softly. "He's finally home." He turned her in his arms, his gaze soft and full of a love that still, after all this time, took her breath away. He was no longer a man defined by his darkness, but one redeemed by love. And she was no longer a woman just surviving, but a woman who was thriving, safe and cherished. They had found in each other not an escape, but a sanctuary, a place where their two vastly different worlds had merged to create a new one that was entirely their own. He kissed her gently, a quiet promise of all the tomorrows they had fought so hard to win. This story teaches us that love is not just an emotion, but a powerful catalyst for change. It shows that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to fight for it, and that true strength lies in the courage to dismantle a world that is wrong, even if it's the only one you've ever known, to build a new one worthy of the love you found. It is a testament to the idea that our past does not have to define our future, and that even in the face of immense darkness, the light of connection can forge a path toward a better self. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If this story moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more dramatic tales, and sharing it with someone who appreciates a story of love and redemption. What did you think of Julian's grand gesture? Was it the only way he could truly win Elara back? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, who would you like to see find their own unlikely love? Let us know by voting in the poll. A. Min Jun, the loyal lieutenant who has to protect a witness who drives him crazy. B. Maya, Elara's supportive best friend who falls for a charming but mysterious stranger.